One of the assumptions that we run into a lot in the course of our work is this idea that for tax purposes, churches and ministries are essentially the same category of nonprofit. Well, turns out that's not exactly how it works. Hi, this is Greg McRae, founder and CEO of Foundation Group, and welcome back to our 501c3 University channel, where we strive to make nonprofit issues understandable. Today's topic is one that surfaces pretty often around here, and that is the difference between a church and a ministry for 501c3 purposes. Now, most often, this confusion comes because people are focused on the various IRS purpose categories. Now, we've covered this whole idea of 501c3 purpose categories in another video, which we'll link in the description below. But to summarize, those categories are religious, charitable, scientific research, testing for public safety, literary, education, fostering amateur sports, and prevention of cruelty to animals and children. So if you look at that list, what jumps out at you? Well, the first one on the list is religious. So the assumption is that a church and a parachurch ministry, better referred to technically as a religious charity, since both are religious organizations, they're in the same category of 501c3 nonprofit. And that's actually true from a categorical standpoint. What follows then is the notion that because both organizational types share a purpose category, then they must be treated the same way for tax purposes. And that's not true at all. The reality is the IRS has a somewhat confusing way that they deal with this stuff. Surprising, I know. It's best to think of this as a three-stage categorization process. The first stage or filter is that purpose category. Is your nonprofit organization's purpose a qualifying one under 501c3? Is it exclusively religious? Is it exclusively literary or educational? That's the biggest hurdle. Assuming your purpose qualifies, then comes the foundation test. In your IRS application for 501c3 status, you will have told the IRS that you want to be considered either a public charity, a private foundation, or a private operating foundation. That's stage 2. Now, we're not going to get into the differences between those today. We'll link an earlier video below that deals with that topic. Suffice it to say, if you're qualifying as a religious entity, then you probably are asking the IRS for public charity status as a 501c3. That gets us to stage 3, and that is subcategory. And under that subcategory are a number of options, and this is where churches take a different fork in the road than do religious charities. Religious charities most often fall under subsection 501A1 and 170B1A6. While churches actually get their category of 501c3 under 509A1 and 170B1A1. Now, don't get bogged down in the crazy subsection references. What matters is the difference in how these organizations are treated, and that's what I'll get into next. Virtually all nonprofits that are seeking tax-exempt status from the IRS file a Form 1023 or 1024 application, depending on the 501c status they want. Assuming it's a 501c3, as most are, it's the Form 1023 that's filed. Now, I say virtually all because here's our first point of difference between a church and a religious charity. We've spoken a lot about this in other videos about churches and 501c3 status, so I'm going to be brief here. Those videos are in the description below if you want to check them out. If you're starting a parachurch ministry or other religious charity, you must file Form 1023 with the IRS and request a determination letter as a 501c3. You have no choice. If you are starting a church, however, you have an option. You can file Form 1023 and seek formal recognition, which in our opinion is the best option most of the time, or you can choose not to. So what happens if you choose not to? As we explain in our other videos, there's another part of the tax code called Section 508 that explains the process for how a startup nonprofit is to seek tax exemption under 501c3. In Section 508, it explains that under the law, churches are automatically presumed tax exempt under 501c3 simply by existing. Again, it's automatic. The ramifications of this matter, so pay close attention to what I'm about to say next. Now, if a church forms and doesn't apply for 501c3 status using Form 1023, they are still going to be considered a 501c3 automatically. That may be good for you or not at all what you want. Some prefer to apply for and receive an actual determination letter, And there's lots of reasons why this makes sense, including better donation deductibility protection for your members. In general, a determined status is better than a provisional one. But you can also operate as a 501c3 without applying for a determination letter. The other side of the coin, however, is that you may not want your church to be a 501c3. What then if the status is automatic? This is where it gets a little murkier and the law is less clear. Most knowledgeable tax advisors will tell you to form a commercial entity like an LLC or a C corporation and then file corporate tax returns and pay tax on any net surplus or profit. That way you're never presenting yourself as a church for tax purposes. I'll say this again because there are many people out there who believe that a church can be tax exempt without being 501c3, and that is simply false. Watch the other videos I referenced for more info on that. Whether you apply with Form 1023 or you don't, the IRS will automatically categorize your church as a 501c3, so if you don't want that, operate as a business for tax purposes. The second major difference in the way churches are treated compared to religious charities is when it comes to ongoing reporting. All 501c3 religious organizations are required to file Form 990 annually. Form 990 is another topic we've covered extensively, and it's really the tax return for nonprofits, just without the tax part. They are complex annual information returns dealing with the income, expense, and activities of the nonprofit during the prior fiscal year. And all 501c3 organizations are required to file some version of Form 990 annually, or they risk forfeiting their 501c3 status if they miss 3 years in a row. Except if you're a church. This is one of the most critical differences, and that's that a church never files Form 990 with the IRS. This means essentially that churches have almost no governmental insight into their financial activity, unless a church is audited, which is virtually impossible and almost never happens. In fact, it takes a sign-off by the IRS Director of Exempt Organizations for a church audit to even take place. You're more likely to see a UFO than a church audit. That's just the way it is. Our third and final major difference between churches and religious charities is when it comes to state-level solicitations registration. As a reminder, 40 states plus DC require charities to register with the state prior to soliciting donations or really conducting any type of revenue generation activity. So what does that mean for religious charities? Well, they must register and get permission to raise money. Churches, as you have probably already guessed, they do not in most cases. So unless a church is getting into games of chance like bingo or something similar that would require a gaming license, states exempt churches from the registration and renewal process. Yet another big difference between the two subcategories of religious organizations. So as you can see, there are significant differences between the two subcategories, church and religious ministry. And we bring this up today because there is so much confusion and people presume they're treated the same. That is, either churches are held to the same rules as all religious nonprofits, which is not true, or that religious nonprofits enjoy the same exemptions that churches do, which is also not true. I hope this has helped you understand this confusing topic just a little bit better. Got questions or comments? Be sure to post them below. That's it for now. Go serve your community. Hey, do me a favor and don't navigate away just yet. We would really appreciate it if you would hit the like button below, as it really helps get our content recommended to more people. Subscribe if you haven't already, as we have great content coming your way on a regular basis. Finally, you can click the little bell icon to be notified of new content when we post it. To learn more about Foundation Group, you can visit us on the web at www.501c3.org. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.